All right, welcome folks to the 9th session of Sitecore Headless development user group. My name is Martin Miles, and we have three wonderful speakers lined up today. I'd like to introduce Alex Doroshenko, a warrior of a demo team, a legendary person who stands behind demo team. And Alex will do the presentation about the multi-site. This is something I wanted to do, and I wanted to broadcast that, but after talking with Alex, I decided I'd better pass this first hands, because you are working for Sitecore, you know things better than I do. From my end, I have achieved this success, so multi-site it all works for me perfectly well. More to say, it works with multiple sites, it works in the cloud, it works everywhere, so I managed to do all the settings exactly as I wanted to do. I achieved exactly what I wanted to achieve. Just a separate site, working on a separate hostname. Everything else is shared between the main site and the derived sites. So this is what my multi-site add-on is for me. We also have Kevin Melendez following Alex. And after Kevin, we have Chad Bodwin with the topic about GraphQL. So I'm very excited to hear all three sessions. The one thing I want to tell before we start the news, it was a little bit silent in the recent days, but Sitecore, they did some sort of investment in the .NET Core framework. So historically, Next.js framework was ahead of everything else. So we get middleware to work with it, we get SSG, obviously, we get lots and lots of features, not to say Purcell is the first class provider for the hosting provider for this technology. And we as Sitecore developers, historically, we are basically Microsoft developers. We are .NET developers. So with this shift to .NET Core, there was a big request from the community. Should we support this technology? At some extent, Sitecore provided the .NET headless rendering framework to go with XMCloud. So far so good. Framework is good, but let's be honest, what we need is the starter kit. And that appeared a little bit silent, but the starter kit is now available publicly. There are pull requests already, people are doing pull requests. I managed to do a full test of this starter kit along with the framework. And I will say I tested all the life cycles of it. Everything works as expected. In both editing, pages, experience editor, content publishing, hosting, like everything works. For the hosting, I used Microsoft Azure Web Apps as the very obvious and maybe too much straightforward decision. Of course, I want to play it against the other providers, and maybe I will do if I find some time. Potentially, we can go with SSG and do it ourselves using static web apps in Asia, maybe some other providers. I need to dig a little bit further to the topic. So that are the great news. If you are a .NET developer, I really want you to go and check this feature. And please refer to my blog. I will post it as a comment to this session. Also, if we talk about XMCloud, there were recent changes in forms. So there were lots of improvements in forms, namely about the scope. We also have the file upload feature now available with XMCloud forms. So the product becomes major and major. And there is one more exciting change in the structure of the structural change for the pages. I'm not probably allowed to talk much about that, but think about how you construct a page, and you always have to create some your own layouts, and you do lots of repetitive work that probably should be somehow automated and taken away from you. And Sitecore has the exact recipe for that, and the recipe is good. I will keep this a little bit silent, so let's keep it as a hidden surprise for the later. So, but they have the answer, the precise answer to that. So with this good news in mind, I am passing the host to Alex, and let's learn about multi-site.
I'm Alex. I'm a developer at Sitecore demo team. I've been with Sitecore for a long time. more than 10 years, always building websites, not just demo sites, but also quite recently, Sitecore.com website and all the corporate sites of Sitecore. And in this project and kind of project introduction and multi-site kind of overview, I'm excited to share this project part because this is one of the projects where our team had a lot of autonomy in building it. So we've had, of course, like high-level requirements, what we want to show, what we want to build, but the team, like with the team effort, came up with a lot of ideas, like what to build, how to structure multi-site, how to show these features, how they should look, and like what content to put into it. So it's all like team effort, and we've made as much as possible efforts to like make it simple, very usable. It's open source, and I will show later like how to try it and see it, like, and how this and demo all this multi-site feature. But still, this project that I'm going to show, we didn't publish a lot of news or like documents about it. It's still kind of pre-release because we're still adding final touches to it. Like some sections of these sites don't have translation. We're adding them or like missing some images, but it's public open source, like, and it's ready to use. And a lot of people internally already use it and build their multi-site demos with it. So agenda, pretty simple. Configuration, which is, again, like there's literally like almost no configuration. It's enabled by default. I'll go over single versus multiple rendering, what used to be called rendering. Now it's mostly referred to as editing host. Then this verticals project that we've built using all these latest multi-site features. Multi-site CSS variables is something that's probably existed since CSS was invented, but myself being not a front-end developer, but more of a back-end person, something I didn't know about, and what we came up with the team as a proof of concept and integrated into this project was pretty neat solution, I think. I wanted to share that one. Also, sharing components between the sites. I'd like to just highlight these capabilities that exist in pages to actually make it possible to share all this. So configuration, it's if you're using latest XM Cloud Foundation template, it's pretty much included by default. You just add additional sites, and you don't need to enable any configs, any additional files or variables. You just create multiple sites, as I will show in the demo, assign the host names, and you deploy it to whatever front-end hosting you want. And there's actually great documentation from Sitecore. Myself, I don't like to read a lot of documentation before playing with some technology or some tool, but this documentation is actually really useful. It goes deep. It's a single page, and it goes deep into all the internal details of how these JSS features work. And what's also interesting is that it has a lot of diagrams, like flows, like what goes where, and a lot of logic of resolving sites is actually built into the front-end part, into this like JSS and XM Cloud Foundation template. So it means like it's highly customizable, so you can change basically everything. And even though it's highly customizable, I would still advise, like, if you find some use case that you want to change, it doesn't work out of the box, and maybe it could be useful not only for your project, but some others, I would still suggest, like, if it doesn't work, report it to Sitecore support so that it gets tracked, it gets fixed in the future versions if it applies to multiple projects. And also, if you decide to not to read the documentation, I would still suggest to go to that page and read the last paragraph on it. It shows kind of known limitations of the module. For example, it doesn't support virtual folders and a few others. Those would be really useful to know before you start actually playing with multi-site. Single versus multiple editing hosts, it sounds like an easy question, but we as a team spent quite some time deciding between the two. And again, in this case, Sitecore has, I have a link over here. Sitecore has a great doc with the difference between the two like approaches, and there's like probably 100 different points to consider and nuances. But I've listed here the ones we've kind of considered as a team when we are playing with this idea. And just in general, like why do you need single or multiple editing hosts? You're gonna have single XM Cloud environment. That's your XM Cloud project. That's why we're talking multi-site. If you could deploy multiple XM Cloud environments, different projects, that's multi-site too, but probably in a different way. We're talking about deployment when you have single XM Cloud project, and your front-end project, you can have either one project that hosts front-end for like CSS and components for all of your sites, or you could have multiple front-end projects completely separate. Each of them would have their own editing host on XM Cloud, also deployed automatically through XM Cloud CI, and each of them would have front-end application here. But the differences are if you go with single, you probably have easier upgrades to the project. If you want to upgrade Sitecore GSS version, if you want to upgrade any dependencies, you do it once, and all of it applies to all of the sites that you might have. Like in this examples that we had just 2, but of course, like there could be like a lot of the sites, and in that case, probably a single edit host would make sense. But it also depends on each specific scenario. For example, if you want to share components, if there is, let's say, the set of sites you're building, they have some common design guidelines, same brand or similar a lot of similarities, then yeah, like it's good to have a lot of shared components, shared base CSS. But if the sites are completely different and like look differently and different like set of components, maybe unique components make more sense, and then multiple editing hosts are also useful. But one other point to consider is depending on where you host your front-end application, it might affect like the cost of hosting front-end. Like if you're paying per project, let's say you deploy to Vercel, if you have unlimited projects, that's not a big deal. If you pay for each project and you want to kind of consolidate it into one, then single editing host is more useful. But it doesn't mean that if you're using single editing host, you're limited to single front-end app. In this scenario, you can also have multiple front-end apps. You'll still have single editing host, you don't need more, but front-end apps, if you, for some certain scenario, want to scale out, in this case, you can have multiple. But if you're using multiple editing hosts, you cannot go back to single front-end app. It's not going to work for styling and JavaScript. And the last point, if you have single team working on multiple sites on this multiple solution, then single editing hosts make a lot of sense. But if you have dedicated teams separately working on each of these sites, like team A works on this side, team B works on this side, then upgrade time doesn't become an issue because each team could do the upgrade, and it's not that complicated. Like it can take maybe half an hour to upgrade to recent GSS version. And that case, multiple teams, probably this one becomes more attractive. But again, really depends on specific projects, and you cannot really go wrong with one or another. Like if you start with single editing host and at some point you realize that you want to kind of branch out to multiple, you can just copy existing this single project, create another folder, and yeah, branch it out. I see, Chad, that you have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean by upgrade time. Is that specifically related to the JSS?
Specifically JSS version, like upgrading from 22.1 to 22.1.3 to some minor releases. That also adds additional features to Sitecore.
Gotcha.
So yes, this is it. So verticals project. I have a link over here, and here it is. It's a new demo from Sitecore, and it's XM Cloud focused demo. And it's important that it's, I would emphasize that it's XM Cloud focused. So it's not about in general, like composable and bringing all the products from Sitecore together. We have Play Summit for that one, and I love the Play Summit project. It literally has everything. Like you have search, you have deep CDP integration, you have personalize, you have like basically all the projects all the products that Sitecore has. They are integrated in that demo, but it also makes that Play Summit demo more complicated for new users to start with or to understand like how does XM Cloud work. So what we try to do with this one is to make it as simple and as similar to XM Cloud Foundation template as possible. So it would be as easy to start with this demo as it is with XM Cloud Foundation template. So we don't have a lot of, well, almost don't have any like customizations of base Sitecore files. We try to keep them minimal. It's just like XM Cloud Foundation template with additional templates and items that we've added, with additional components that you could use. And it's multi-site, it's multilingual, and we had native speaker speaking French Canadian translate the site to French. Multi-theme, you will see the approach we've taken with this theming. And again, simple, easy to customize. And what we try to keep it updated to latest. We do the same with Play Summit. Even more important for this one, keep it up to date with latest Sitecore JSS version. Basically, in the past months, whenever new version of Sitecore JSS was released, next day or maybe next week, we always had it updated to the latest version, just so that it's compatible with all the new features that get really quickly added to pages, enabling this metadata mode and more features probably come in Symposium. So we keep it up to date with the latest version. And it's multi-site. We have 3 sites in it. One is basic skate park template. And again, it's using single editing host. And we try to not to break the basic site. We also have site called financial, which is kind of simple sites that maybe a local bank could have. It's intentionally made kind of very not too bold or like exciting because it's a banking site. And this is actually something we were called out initially when we presented first version to our product owners. They found this site a bit boring, but that was actually the intent. Like we wanted to make one of the sites more boring and easily stylable for like any vertical you want to style it for. And we have services site, which is sort of fake web development agency. That site is more bold, exciting, with lots of moving elements, with like interesting components and variations, and we have a lot of components there, as you will see in the demo. Not much to say about architecture. It's XM Cloud. Everything's published to Edge. Content and layout goes here, and we have multi-site front-end app over here. We also have, even though it's like not about integrations, we have Content Hub enabled, and if you want to add it, it's easily pluggable to this site. And of course, like components and embedded personalization is there, but we don't have search. We don't have CDP, full CDP and personalized integrations here, even so they could be added pretty easily, but we don't have them out of the box. If you're looking for like everything in one project, that's like the Play Summit. And speaking of these multi-site CSS variables, so as a mostly backend developer, I still knew all of these CSS variable things, and I've used them to kind of extract some common variables across the project. But for this theming kind of feature, we actually have 2 different sites, and each of the sites will also have light version and dark version. So our front-end developer came up with this neat idea of just scoping them. And what the part that I didn't realize that these variables can kind of override each other. Like if you can define them on the root level for site-financial, and if it's .dark, like right, you also can have the same variables with different values. And the same for the other side, which is services side in our case. You can also have like this, and by just changing one variable, you will have it applied to a specific theme, and it's all in a place. And it also applies not just to colors. You can apply the same approach to fonts, and you can see from the sites we do that as well, and all the cross-site variables. From the code perspective, you see that what we did is just take the this context CSS class from the theme attribute from the layout data, but we actually, and this is custom attributes that we've added, and initially we've used
this.
One more person talking. Yep, sorry. And initially we've used site name, and we didn't need any custom attributes here. And site name actually would work for a lot of cases where you as developers control the sites that get created, and you control the names of these sites, and site name probably work as well. Or we could use like some built-in variable, but we wanted to support the case where you take one site like this financial, you clone it, and obviously like it will have a different name in the content tree, or this one will have different name as well. So we've just added additional field theme to the site definition. We get that field, we added as a class site-something, and added to this top level, root level div in, I think it's layout, yeah, it's layout tsx file. So that was basically it. And go on to the next slide. Yes, so what really made this single editing host possible, even though we have multiple sites and they look different, is this features of Sitecore / pages styles, which allow you to kind of add additional here, like we have border dotted accents, like a lot of additional checkboxes on components that make them look different. I will show it more in the demo. Or variants, like on one side you can have only default variant, on other side it will have background image or placeholder. And of course, this feature that allows you to restrict which components are available on which sites. And what's also important is that these styles and variants, they can also be set up differently per site. So for example, on this financial site, we can have only default variant available. And on some other site, like services site, we can have only placeholder variant available, or only certain checkboxes available depending on what do you want to allow the users to use on your sites. And that was quite useful. And I'm going to show it, and that's the demo time. So what I will do, a second. Yep. So you should see Visual Studio, but I'm going to show something else first. And that's the repo. So Sitecore demo XM Cloud verticals, it's published there. And there are multiple ways to get started with it and like try it yourself. You can host it completely locally. And I think we have very simple getting started guide here. Like if you want to run Docker locally and everything else, it's literally just .apps1 once you've cloned the site. And it will work. We tested it, but we didn't really use it a lot. So primarily this whole project was developed by our front-end developers who didn't have to run Docker any single time. We've just used shared XM Cloud instance, and developers remotely connected to that XM Cloud instance and build the site this way. They used pages, including pages that connect to your local site. And Docker, if you don't have access to XM Cloud and you don't have access to demo portal, which also allows you to deploy an instance and connect to that instance from your local environment, then yeah, APS1 should work as well. And test it on Windows 10, Windows 11, and it starts up pretty quickly because it's pretty lightweight project. But the easiest way to get started is if you have access to the demo portal, then just go and create a demo yourself. And in XMCloud category, we now have this vertical demos option. And if you click this one, you just give it a name, and I will call it SUG test. And if you're lucky, you will get it actually immediately, because we have some pre-warmed up instances that are ready to be claimed. If it's available, let's see if I'm lucky today. I go to summary, click deploy. Okay, yes, it worked for me. So I click one button, I have the instance immediately. That's my instance, SUG test, and this name is just because it was pre-created and it's just got assigned to me. So I click that one. I have the instance of these vertical sites with front end, with back end, and XMCloud. It's deployed to Vercel, to the shared Vercel by default. And you can also, when you create a demo, let's just quickly now show it. You can also deploy it to your own environment, kind of. It will still deploy to our demo team's XMCloud, but you can set your own Vercel details, and you can also use your own GitHub repository. So we can actually deploy your code to XMCloud and deploy front end to Vercel, the one you use. But I'm gonna go here and like go to one of these instances. Important details that we share now on demo portal is preview and live context ID. So this is basically all you need to connect from your local development environment to XMCloud. If you clone the project from here, and I just did it. So I have my project here. I've just added this env. I will make it bigger. Yes. I've only added env.local file with this edge context ID and the site name to the project. And now that I run npm run start connected, I should be able to get started with local development of this site without deploying anything locally. Like our front-end developers were super excited about not having to run Docker, and it was much quicker for them. You just have an instance of XMCloud somewhere with templates and items, and yeah, just this single variable connects you to it. And if I now go to XMCloud, let's see where it is. The localhost 3000. This should bring up the services site for me locally. Yes, and there it is. I have the site, and it has, and you can see this services site. It has a lot of components. So the intent is to build, was to build a lot of components that could be useful if you're using this site as a base for your own demo or proof of concept, and you could just take the ones you need. Of course, no real website going to have all these components on the homepage, but we've put them all here as a kind of kitchen sink page, so you can see what's available and you can like just use the ones you need. But we have a lot of different components that are ready to use and customize. And so this is my local site. And for example, if I go to the hero banner and I change title, I user group. Yep. All the changes should be there immediately. This one might refresh. Yes, so it works. So it's super easy to get started, even if you want to add your own code and like customize something or play with CSS. And then once you're done, if you're using your custom Git repository, what you can also do, this is a new addition to the Sitecore demo portal. We have this button called build and deploy. And Vercel, once you push your code to the repository, it will update automatically. But for Sitecore pages to pick up your changes, you need to deploy to XM Cloud, and you can do that by clicking this button. Previously, the workaround was to click the stop button, wait, then click start button. It would take maybe half an hour, but now you have this build and deploy button. It will just do another build on top of XM Cloud, where you don't have deploy portal access if you deploy the demo through demo portal, but we've exposed this button and we're open to kind of feature requests to expose more features if they're needed. And what else I'm gonna show is this edge delivery endpoint. So this edge information also exposed here. You can click here. We show your API key here. So if you copy this key, edit here, you can run site queries. Like here you see we have this attributes available for the site, or if I want to just list the sites, it's all here. And it's easy to play with, even though like it was deployed really quickly through this demo portal. So the thing I wanted to show is this financial website. And we've adjusted to this feedback, the site being boring. So we've added some kind of videos and some kind of interactivity to this site with moving elements. But as you will see, if you play with it yourself, is that actually a lot of components have additional checkboxes that make them interactive. For example, this pop-up image, you can make it move up, you can make it like appear on the page or be static. That's all configurable through pages. The same with these numbers moving and everything. And the page is also personalized. So if you want to quickly try out personalization, it's also here. Like I've switched to business, and it shows different video in the carousel by default. And as with everything with this project, we wanted to keep it simple and logical. So you can, it's not some magical, like if you go to this page, then it will show this. In this case, we've used just personalization in Sitecore personalized embedded rules based on UGM campaign over here, but could be anything. This is just a quick and simple example of personalization. And components that we built on this side are also all sorts of components. They're like simple, just promos. Added one example of more complicated one with calculations and forms. So yeah, all sorts of components here. And if I go to Sitecore Launchpad, another important things that we've used to build this site is we didn't use we used content editor, of course, to like create some system items of sorts, but we didn't use experience editor. It's all was done through pages. So everything you can see on this page and on both of these sites, it's all editable through pages, and you can apply like all these styles. So if you go here, I talked about effects, right? So instead of fade up, I can make it fade zoom. I don't think it show ups in pages, but it would affect the site. Or theming, we've added a lot of custom themes to many different components, just because we use them, and also just to show what's possible, even if it's not kind of applied to the site itself. But you can see that it's configurable here. And if you go to content editor, you can see all the multi-sites here. And the thing that this actually helps it decide like which site to show based on domain is this hostname field. And you can have multiple hostname added via this pipe separator. But from the Vercel side, it's basically, I have this single project site here. Sorry, I want to go to settings. Yes. So on Vercel, it's a single site, and we have multiple domains assigned. So you see financial here, services, and just website here. And in terms of environment variables, we have Sitecore site name here, even so this one is not really required because it's a multi-site project. What it affects if you're just creating this project and building the site, If I go back, yes, you see this screenshot. If you don't set the Sitecore site name, it's gonna show 404 because it wouldn't be able to kind of show default site screenshot while building the site. But it would still work. And apart from that, yeah, all these settings apply to all the sites that we have. And another thing I wanted to show is that theme approach is I can actually change it on the fly. And if I go to settings of the financial site, nope. We've made it as simple as just financial name, and I can change it to services, and it will still work. And to make it show up quicker, I'll just show it in pages. The site will complete it differently. Yep. So we changed it. Everything still works. Looks a bit interesting, but still everything's working. And it's like I really like this light and dark option, so you can switch it. It works in pages, it works in your browser, and it will actually automatically detect if you're browsing from a device that has dark theme set, it will have it enabled. And I see raised hands, and yeah, let's pause for questions. Martin,
yes, Alex,
go ahead.
Would you please switch back to content editor?
Yes.
So the question I have, if you go to, on this item, so you see the field called valid for environments, and you have asterisk here. So the question is, what is the value for this field? Like, is it like dev, test, or prod? So does this value match the name of the environment as you call them from the cloud portal? Because that was my assumption, and I try naming them exactly that. For some reason, it did not match for me when I was playing multisite.
I'm not quite sure about this field. I don't think it's somehow connected to XM Cloud environment, environment name. So that I believe it's somewhere from previous versions of SXA, but we've never changed this field for any of the sites or demos. So not quite sure about environment field.
I want to give a good troubleshooting tip as well. Yep. So if you are on a desktop, you have the this Sitecore button at the left bottom. You click it, you go to SXA tools, and that's where you will find Multisite Manager. PowerShell Toolbox, actually. Yeah. Yes. Go here. So if your derived site for some reason is not seen, so first of all, make sure it sits up as possible, because they're all listed here.
Yep.
There are all three your website, and they are also mapped to environment, which is this star in our case. And I was unable to make it work with anything else than star. So that's why you have to precisely, accurately match the host name to from the host column to what sits in the verse cell. So that's number one. Number two, sometimes you will see the size disabled. So, or sometimes they will be not in the right order. So the order matters from this tool. Make sure you don't have the most catch-all site at the top, because the other site will not get it down. So for example, you have star as the hostname value. You still can have it, but it should be on the bottom. And the last tip I want to tell you is if you, Alex, can go back to the content editor.
Yes.
So in the real development, you will have multiple environments like prod, dev, and test, as we just discussed. And these values of the site grouping value, so if you open, you should keep them outside of source control. So basically, there are two different recipes you can approach. More simple or more complicated. So the simple recipe is you make serialization for this item in that manner that it just creates once if it's missing, and it keeps the value. Then you go manually. You manually adjust the host name in the beginning of your development lifecycle, and it stays that value. So it will not get overwritten. So that would work. But there is a more advanced scenario. We call that item patching. Here at Perficient, we have a solution, which is basically what it does. It allows to automatically insert the value of specific fields, like override the values based on the environment. So you don't even need to have that. Basically, what you end up with under each of these items, so you have financial selected, this is site grouping value, you will have like a shadow folder with the items of the same, like same template item per each of the environment with empty values. So you can only provide the values you want to override for a specific environment, and they automatically get applied. So that's like a black magic, but you don't need to even exclude files. Two options already available, but if you don't pick up either of them, you will end up getting your changes overwritten from the deployment, and you will start guessing why my site is not there. So there were two troubleshooting tips for multi-site from me.
Yep. Thank you. These are really useful ones. And I would just add also that if you enable debug in Sitecore GSS, it will actually show some debug information for multi-sites as well. So if I go back to the project and go to the build logs over here, it will show the sites that it fetched. And if I scroll here, yes, it will show the query it uses to fetch the sites, right? So this is a query that I showed before in this Edge playground. This is actual query it uses to get the site's information, and it can be helpful for you. And so it gets this information about the sites. It also outputs the response that it received about sites available. And if at some point, like you see the build errors on the cell side, I would recommend just to go, just show it again. If you go to project, so settings, environment variables, enable debug and set it to star. That would just get debug information from all. And debug multi-line, it's just much easier to read the GraphQL responses if you have debug multi-line set to true. So yeah, these are two settings I'd recommend to use for troubleshooting. And if you ever submit help requests to Sitecore support, they would probably also ask you this information, like what's the site's responses output.
So there is one more debugging technique for multi-site. Alex, you mentioned env.local file. So in addition to these values, you can add debug equals Sitecore-GSS : multi-site. So that will, what this does, this is precisely allow you to output the log of how multi-site middleware works. And that alone was too much helpful for me because I was misunderstanding them. So basically in my scenario, I was getting the middleware working correctly. So what middleware does, it uses this temp config file to retrieve all the sites. So because we operate the single rendering host, we need to somehow differ them. And upon the compilation, so it's like build, it's not runtime, it's build time thing. So on a build time, this config file gets generated, and it takes all, it does this GraphQL request to retrieve the sites, and it creates an array of the sites and the host name. So this this array is used to basically identify which site the request is coming from further down the life cycle. This is how multi-site works. And in my case, I faced the problem that multi-site identified the host name correctly. So in my case, it was using the right site context. It uses the right virtual folder, and the virtual folder separate like _site _ the site name, the actual site name. So everything was right. I actually was setting the correct cookie. So you see set cookie, and a few lines below, you have
site equals basic.
Yes, everything worked fine for me. So that alone gave me the understanding the problem comes not from the middleware, it's coming from somewhere far ahead, like something in Sitecore was breaking it. And that was basically what I previously explained.
Oh yes, the environments.
Yeah.
This, if you're on the cell or like whatever hosting you use, like the logs, they will also show this quite comprehensive information. And I see another question from Chico.
Hi Alex. I want to understand that how the language model works here. I have two questions. One is when I want to add new language, is there any restriction that new language code adding in the portal, and also how to have a callback languages?
So fallback languages, yes, I'm gonna show the language model here. So yes, on the homepage, we have French language here as well. So we'll switch to French. See, everything switched to French. By default, it just added this suffix at the end, FRCA. From our side, all we did is we've just added a language under system and languages. We set up, I think we translated everything, but we did set up fallback language to English for us. And also what we did for Next.js is there was this file. Let me show you. SXA starter. And you can see we didn't even rename the folders. So it's still called SXA starter because we wanted to maintain consistency and keep it very similar to the XM Cloud Foundation template. So this config, yes. So for this I18N, basically for the dictionary entries, we've listed the languages that we want to support in our application here in this config. That's all the configurations we've done for multilingual.
Okay.
I got some additions, Alex, to this. So with the great flexibility, there are some trade-offs you have to take. One of the trade-offs.
Please.
So one of the trade-offs is that for multi-site, you'll have to share 404 and 500. So you cannot have individual 404 or 500 for each of the site. However, you can have them in multiple languages. So you can have, as for the normal website, you can have 404 in French and in Spanish and in English. The same, it will show up for your all of your sites. But the 404 itself is the same. And the reason to it is because you're basically using the same rendering host. And the way page routing happens is that it has individual 404 and 500 files under the source, and the rest comes to the casual path. So that's how. I mean, you can still manually implement things like that, but it's, in my opinion, it's too much hassle to do.
Yes, that's a good point, and that's one of the limitations. That's why I said, like, it's important to, even if you don't read the entire documentation, just go to this last paragraph that lists all the limitations that are known for this with the multi-site.
Okay, and I have one more question. It's a general question. So in case if I want to move my existing Sitecore project into XM Cloud, and I'm heavily using XDB, so what would my choice? Is it only the CDP is my choice, or do I have any option within XM Cloud for
I can answer
migrate?
that.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Martin.
So the one thing you can do is you can migrate your XDB into CDP. The way to do that is I haven't tried that myself, but what I know, there is a tool that does this conversion. You can also use Sitecore Connect. And for Sitecore Connect specifically, there will be a recipe for XDB, XP-XDB. So basically what Sitecore Connect is it allows you to use one Sitecore product and one non-Sitecore product. Saying Sitecore product, I mean cloud composable product. In this case, XP with XDB serves like external product. And with that in mind, you can convert your visitors and events information into like transactions into the CDP.
Okay.
I don't know if it's worth of doing that because all such of operations are quite heavy in the effort. You must talk to your stakeholders first, and I would advise to do a POC, a quick POC to assess the complexity, talk to your stakeholders, explain that we are dealing with this volume of data. And my favorite saying is that if you cannot measure that, you do not own that. So measure the volume, talk to stakeholders, explain them the complexity, explain them the reasons. Do they actually need these values? Or maybe they can just start from a blank page. Based on the conversations, you will decide what to do.
Okay, got it.
Technically, you can do that. Practically, do you need to do that? That's a question.
Is there any other alternative instead of going to CDP? and having the integrated database or something in place with the XM cloud?
Not something I know.
Okay.
Probably your client would go alternative road. They can stay with XP instead.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing stops you going full power headless with your XP. You still have content delivery server that allows you more precisely customize your GraphQL. Again, I would not recommend doing that, because if you later want to get migrated to XM Cloud and to Experience Edge schema is not something that you can easily customize. I think it's not customizable at all. So, but if you want to stay on XP, and from the recent Sitecore announcement, we know that XP product will be supported at least until 2030. So you
Okay.
have at least 5 more years for consistent work. So, I mean, if it works, why would you break it? Keep working.
Mm-hmm.
If you want fancy headless, just rewrite a website to headless. You can do it on a one side-by-side step. So basically, you can share non-headless and headless sites within the same Sitecore instance, and even XP, even XP, because XM XP, it doesn't matter. So go for it.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
I would just add,
And
yeah,
oh, sorry to interrupt.
just-
And one more question. Is it the
Yep.
CMP integration I have seen? Is it the Content Hub integration? Is there any change, like within any pipeline needs to be like a template mapping needs to be done, or any other simpler versions introduced within XM Cloud for mapping
it's
Content Hub to
basic.
CMP?
It's basically the same module. So
Okay.
same mapping, the same approach that applied, and even same templates that applied to XP, XM. It's the same in XM Cloud. No difference there.
I can add a little bit again. So the CDP, the Content Hub connector, DIM and CMP, they are already built in the base image.
Yep.
So that's a little bit more simple for you to go with the XM Cloud. I've done the exercise of pairing Content Hub with XM Cloud. So basically you end up to, I think there were 8 environmental variables. The only catch is that you have to do that from the both sides. You have to set up from XM Cloud side and from DIM side. So, and it magically works. It works in Pages, it works in Experience Editor. So in Pages, you can select assets from your DIM and so on and so forth. Okay, let's go for the questions. And
yeah, and we have one more from Narnit.
Hey, Alex, thanks for the presentation. I just had one question. Usually when we talk about the likes of Vercel or Netlify or XM Cloud, we talk about Git connected builds and deploys, right? So you basically have your source repo and the branches connected to Vercel or to XM Cloud, and your commits get auto deployed. What is your experience using Sitecore CLI to do the same? And the reason why I ask is if there is a business requirement where we need to do the build within our firewall, where we can't expose out our repository, how seamless or how difficult is it using the CLI?
Well, if you use Sitecore CLI, the build actually happens on XM Cloud side. So what we, from the Sitecore demo portal side, when we deploy stuff, we don't connect XM Cloud with GitHub repository. What we actually do is we internally use the same APIs that Sitecore CLI uses. We package source code in a zip file and we ship it to XM Cloud. And that's basically what Sitecore CLI does as well. And the actual build still happens on XM Cloud. Even if you use Sitecore CLI, there is still a build step. I will show one of the examples right here. So this deployment was created from the API, basically from the same as Sitecore CLI, but there was still a build step. So you will still kind of ship the source code to the XM Cloud, and it will build it internally.
Is there an option? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I throw the CLI command to the chat so you can see. Basically, this is the most important command you will have. This is the one that creates your deployment. And you may see it has a working directory parameter, which is dot. So basically what happens, your CLI takes the whole source code, sends it to cloud for build. and that's where build happens. So Alex is exactly precisely explaining that. Doesn't matter which of three methods you use. If you use CLI, or if you are using REST API for sending the commands, or if you are using build deploy app, which is effectively just a website, nice UI for REST API, it does all that same. It takes the code from your local and it sends it to the cloud. The cloud builds it. The cloud has security and safety railguards, so you won't break your build. There are different checks that prevent you from breaking your build, and that's done for the better. But in short, that is how it works. Now, to answer your question about the practical aspect of it. So I've been involved in the multiple XM Cloud projects over the time, and I will say it's not just my experience. I know it's across the industry from other partners. Generally, people are not using build deploy app. I mean, they are using it at some extent, but the majority of the CI process is done by, I would say, Azure DevOps in most cases. So Azure DevOps, under the hood, they use the pipelines, and it's still under the hood leverages CLI functionality. And of course, you see, if you send your build from CLI, you can go to build and deploy app, and you will immediately see the progress. You will see all that same stuff as you see in your console, but even more. You will be able to access your logs in real time. You will see the errors. You get a bunch of things to do. Same from, it's basically a nice UI wrapper. So whichever process you choose, it will still be there. If you throw the build from your Azure DevOps using CLI, you will immediately see that in build and deploy app. So it's a matter of preferences. I don't know, I think Azure DevOps gives a little bit more flexibility in our case.
So it's in a way, it's safe to assume that you can't do your end-to-end build locally and then ship out the artifacts, but you'll need to kind of ship out the source code itself for XM Cloud to do the build.
You can do build locally, and Alex showed exactly how to do that by running the build command locally with npm. That's for the front-end side.
Yeah, for backend, yes, you basically need to ship this package of source code, because what XM Cloud does, it not the artifacts that XM Cloud creates, it's a Docker container image that's used by XM Clouds and to deploy it and to host it.
Yeah, so they give you, for the local development, they give you XM Cloud base image, which is CM image, right? And the good assumption is you basically can build on top of that image, do your own customization, bake your own image, throw it to XM Cloud, and it would work. No, that would not work. They simply do not allow you to alter base image. Instead, what you do instead, you send the source code there, and source code is effectively your C# project. Same as it was before. You may have some C# files that will compile to DLLs. You will have app config folder with the config patches that will in some way do these pipelines or do some sort of alterations, comments, whichever you do to benefit from these compiled DLLs. So we call that customization. So you can do this customization on top of your CM, which is base CM image. So the image which was provided by Sitecore, unchanged, and they do update the versions, like they send new versions of it regularly. So that's why they do not allow you to customize it. But your customization, it sits on top of this base image. Okay, so a good example was I wanted to create two buttons in my content editor, one called expand all and another called collapse all. For, like the sections in content editor, sometimes you have too many of them, you don't want to scroll. I find a JavaScript file on the Sitecore. It works for XP, for XM, and of course for XM Cloud. So I changed this file and I included this file as a part of my C# project, so that when this project sent to the build server, this file is set as a content. So it's basically override the default file coming from the official container, and my customization is get applied. Same for pipelines, same for basically everything like you did before. The only thing Sitecore is discouraging you from doing as many customizations as you want. So with time, they do introduce changes into main image, and some of your changes may be unsupported. So try not to abuse this ability.
Got it. Thank you.
Right, so if we don't get any more questions, Alex, thank you very much for this wonderful demo.
Thank you.
I
And
personally like the way how you do these styles and dark theme. I was always wondering how it works. Now I know. And one of the biggest things is we now have this vertical demo project. This is something I will go and pull immediately after this event and spin up locally.
Oh, and I would just add that unfortunately I cannot share what people have done internally with this demo, but I can tell that we've seen a few examples of the sites that our sales engineers have created on top of verticals demo, and I couldn't believe that it's based on verticals, right? They've skinned it so much, and the feedback internally was also that it's super easy to skin and to make it look like a customer's site on top of this verticals demo. Yeah.
Okay, and the minute of self-promotions before we switch to another speaker. There is a nice repository. I throw it to a chat. It's called Awesome Sitecore. If you have ever come across awesome lists, this is something you have for everything. So Awesome Lists is the curated information for any specific topic on a GitHub. And of course, there is the one for Sitecore. This has all the repositories that may be related to Sitecore. And as soon as I find such gems as Alex just presented, I introduce them into it. So there are all starter kits. There are all the things you can ever think about Sitecore. They are listed there. And I think more than 70 stars. I see 72 stars people marked this repository, which is pretty impressive. Okay, so let's switch to the other speaker,
And it's
Kevin.
Kevin, right? Yes.
Yeah, Kevin. It's all yours.
Yes, your host, Kevin.
All right, thank you. And it looks like Chet snuck in one more question. So Chet, do you want to ask before I kick this off?
Nope, that was just me applauding your start.
Yeah, Alex, that was phenomenal. All right, so what I'll be talking about today is for us developers to embrace XM Cloud, right? And I think Alex showed a lot of the capabilities of XM Cloud and a lot of the cool, almost starter kits that you can use. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through my journey of XM Cloud and really some of the pitfalls and challenges that I've run into. And hopefully as we walk through that, right, there's some good insights so that hopefully you don't run into those same challenges and pitfalls. As we're going through, we have three main objectives. One, we want to make sure that we're supporting all of the XM Cloud features. We want to streamline and optimize that development process. And also a big win for XM Cloud is it allows the authors a lot of freedom and control. And we want to make sure that as we're implementing our solution, that we're retaining that capability. We're going to be talking about not everything in XM Cloud. We're just going to focus on a few different areas that I think are easy to get caught up on or completely miss. And that's going to be your head upgrades, which I know Alex spoke a little bit about. We're going to talk about Headless SXA, some serialization gotchas, and then finally a little bit on XM Cloud components, not too much. And as we go through those areas, I'll share some of the learnings that I've had, some of the mistakes I made, and some of the recommendations that I've walked out away with. And at the end, we'll have some Q&A. So really quickly, I'm Kevin Suarez Melendez. I've been doing digital for over 8 years. I'm a Sitecore MVP and technical director at Exentium. If you ever want to just have a conversation or keep this conversation going, feel free to contact me via email or LinkedIn. All right, so let's jump in. The first one is the head upgrades. And as Alex kind of alluded to, you almost always want to use a template. Now, I like using the default template that just comes with your deploy app in XM Cloud. But of course, if you find a well-maintained template like the verticals template, by all means, use that. Just know that that is now going to be your entry point to upgrades. So when you create this template, it's going to set up your mono repo, right? It's going to set up your backend code. But primarily what we're after is this front end code. And once you create this template, you're going to have a snapshot of this particular head version. And that's going to include a JSS version, but also a bunch of accompanying files that support a lot of those new XM Cloud features that Alex was talking about. So you can see in this case, I made this template not too long ago. It's actually for a real client. And we already have multi-site in here. We have personalized, and there's other features that are kind of baked in to this template. You can see there's other XXA stuff like sitemap, and there's also going to be a bunch of files scattered in through here that support things like XM Cloud components, forms, and some enhancements for pages. And really the first pitfall for me was when I first built a POC on XM Cloud, I decided that I knew better and that I would reorganize this folder. I would say, no, that file doesn't belong there. I'm gonna put it over here and I'm gonna move this over here. And when XM Cloud had a lot of new features enhanced or added to, I went to go upgrade my head solution. And that process typically involves you look at the new template, you look at yours, you do a delta, and it basically merged the two. And because my folder structure was completely out of whack, it was basically fully customized at that point. That merge process was a big headache. So not only should you focus on finding a good maintainable template to use, don't touch it. Don't try to customize too much. Don't try to move around files. You can definitely add your custom files still into your templates. Like you can see in renderings, I have a little blurred box there. That's actually a folder we created for the client's renderings, but we just tried to leave everything else as is. We could modify the files, but not moving around the file structure too much. So use the template, don't mess with it too much. My other mistake that caused a lot of headaches was not really leveraging and understanding headless SXA. So with the default out of the box template, headless SXA is a much more bare bones version of your traditional SXA. You're not going to get 80 components right from the start. Instead, you have about 10 or 12. And even then, most of those are mainly examples. You'll probably only use 3 or 4 of those as is. And I think I was a little intimidated to use SXA for XM Cloud, probably due to some prior experiences with traditional SXA. So the first thing that I recommend is get familiar with headless SXA and kind of the model of SXA. This is a hyper simplified view, but I'll show you how it all connects and what I missed and how you can fix that and make sure you don't fall into that same trap. So at the top, we have tenants and sites, and both of those can point to SXA modules. If you haven't used SXA modules before, you can see those almost as your Helix features, right? It's a packaging of your templates, your rendering settings, a bunch of stuff that essentially make up a feature, right? It doesn't replace Helix, but you can see it for the dependency and kind of grouping of items. They have some similarities. On top of that, they also include a lot of scaffolding. And we're going to see that as we go through and we build more sites inside of XM Cloud, you can install specific XXA modules into the sites. And these modules, because they bring a lot of scaffolding, they're going to automatically populate a lot of their dependencies. So let's take a step back. We're going to go top down, and I'll show you how you can really leverage SXA in your projects. So at the tenant, it's pretty simple, right? It's kind of your root grouping, and it can contain one or more sites. Something that's a little different, if you've already been working with Helix quite a bit, is that when you create a tenant in XM Cloud, it's going to create a project, which means your tenants and your Helix project are a one-to-one mapping. Whereas previously, you may have been used to creating a project for each site. Now the mapping is a project for a whole tenant. Okay. Sites are pretty similar. They live under that particular tenant. You have a few site settings. And again, here we see that module selection show up. And we're going to talk about installing modules and how they all comes together. If we look even further, into a site, we can see more XXA goodies here. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want you to pay attention to that data folder. And inside of that presentation folder, available renderings, headless variants, page designs, partial designs, we're going to be working a lot inside of these things. And we're going to use a lot of the XXA module capabilities to essentially automatically populate a lot of these things. Now, I've been talking about XXA modules a lot, and I'm actually going to skip creating an XXA module because you typically only create a handful of those if you're using custom ones. I do have some resources at the end that will walk you through that in case you do want to do that. But instead, I want to jump into creating components that live inside of those modules, okay? And here was my first mistake. I went ahead and I created the normal items that I typically create for my components, my templates, my branches, my renderings, everything like I used to. That means I went in and I inserted a brand new template. And then I went in, I inserted a brand new rendering and I connected it all and I created my settings. I did that all manual. Plus, we now know that XM Cloud has Headless SXA built in out of the box. So I also had to create all my available renderings from scratch, my variants from scratch, my data folders from scratch, and a whole bunch more. And to add to this, I had a multi-site setup. So not only did I have to do this when I was creating the component, but every time I would install or want to use my component on a different site, I essentially had to manually go and create all of my XXA items again, which, you know, that's not only is it inefficient, it's also risky because if I leave and another developer needs to do that, it's not likely that he's going to know all of the different items that are required for this component to work. So why do it yourself when you can just copy paste? And if you look at the Sitecore documentation, they basically say, look, never create a component from scratch, just like I described I did initially. Instead, we're going to use some wizards and some new scripts that XM Cloud brings to really accelerate this process. And that script is going to be the clone rendering script. So anytime I need to create a new component, the first thing I'm going to do is find a component that is the closest to what I want. And if all else fails, I typically come to this promo component that comes out of the box. And you'll see the Sitecore documentation reference this as well. But I'll right click this component, go to scripts, and I'll hit clone rendering. That'll open up my wizard where I can give it a new name. I can say, hey, here's the module that this component is going to be added into. In this case, you'll see it's blurred because, again, this was actually a real tenant for a client. And in this wizard, I can also determine how I want it to handle rendering parameters and data sources. Once I configure this, it's going to do a lot for me. One, it's going to do what we expect. It's going to create that rendering, right, of example, but it also went ahead and created some templates, right? So I created my template data source item. It created a folder for those data source items, and it also created a template for my parameters. Now, based on those settings I picked on the wizard, it probably brought in some fields as well, but it didn't stop there. It also connected the two, right? So now my rendering, if I click on that, I can see that that rendering is connected to my parameters template. It has a data source location that will work on both single sites and shared sites, and I have my template hooked up. So right there, I'm already saving a couple of minutes. In addition to that, it created a bunch of XXA scaffolding items. So we installed it inside of the content module. So that's why here under system settings project in our custom content module, XXA module, it created two new items, add examples data item and an example item under rendering variants. If we look at, for example, add example data item, what we see is that this is essentially a bootstrap item. And we say, hey, when this module is installed, bootstrap these things. And in this case, we're telling it, hey, we're going to create a brand new item under this location. We selected data. Use this template when you create that item and give it this name, example. Now, there's a lot here, and I'm breaking it all down so you can see what's happening behind the scenes. But all of this was done for me automatically just by using a few clicks through that clone rendering script. So that saves a ton of time. So if you're not doing that and you're on XM Cloud, there's a big efficiency win there. And at this point, I would just go ahead and I'll update the templates it created or the icons to now match my needs for my components. Now we're going to go through installing the module. And that's really simple. You just go to your site. Let me see if I can mute. Go to the site, right click, hit scripts, add site module. You select the module to install. And if I installed that custom module, what you'll see is that now on that site, I just installed my module. We see that that example data source location has been created automatically. And it also created my headless variants for that. And that bootstrap item that we were looking at, we pointed to a template for that data source item, but it actually pointed to a branch template for the variants. So you can see it actually created even more items underneath. And I mean, the possibilities are endless there, right? If you want to create 10 items when this module gets installed, you can definitely do that. But now what this does is you can see I have a developer site. So our developers can create modules and components here. And whenever we're ready to essentially promote that to the real site or to the content author's sandbox, we can just install the modules. And it'll guarantee that all of the dependencies for those components are automatically installed. So big thing that is very easy to miss, because you can literally do all of this manually and you'll never notice anything is wrong until it starts getting unmanageable. Okay, another big shift that came with SXA that, again, I got wrong the first time around was how to properly handle presentation details. The first one was getting in the habit of still creating my custom containers instead of using the XXA grid. With the grid and those, those handful of out-of-the-box components I spoke about, you get the grid, container, column splitter, and row splitter. And now most of the time, if my component needs to be like a 3-card layout where, it's image, text, and a link, most likely I'm using a column splitter. Unless it requires, super special responsive requirements, like maybe on mobile, it turns into a carousel or something like that. Most likely I'm just using this. So we develop the card and we let the column decide how many show up. This does introduce an additional layer for authors to go through if they're using that component often. But again, if our goal is to give that author that control and freedom, this is how we give it to them. If they requested a 3-column layout, we can do that. And if they ever want it to be 4 or 2 or 5, they can do that with no additional development required. They can just modify the columns in their grid. And if you haven't used these, they're pretty powerful. I mean, you have different breakpoints. You can tell that, hey, on desktop, that's 20%. This one's 80%. On mobile, they're both full width. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with this grid. I'm not saying use it every time, but if you can, it's a great way to give your authors an easy win. Every time I show authors this, I guess it goes one of both ways. Some authors are like, oh my God, this is a lot of steps. And other ones are like, oh my God, I want to hug you right now. Right. So based on the team you're working with and, how comfortable they are really getting into the weeds and really making this thing their own, you'll have to find that balance. But it is very powerful when used in the right places. Another one that's really mainly for authors is how we handle page designs. So previously, we're used to kind of creating our page templates, and we'll still do that. But let's say this was a blog page. We would typically then put all of the standard blog components in standard values. The challenge was that when authors then said, hey, I just want to add this promo on all of my blog pages, it's the same promo. Can I just do that real quickly? We say, no, because you can only do that at standard values. And I mean, technically we can go in there and do that, but on the next deployment, that'll get overwritten because we're deploying serialized items. So now with Headless SXA, this is how our presentation details will look like for standard values. It'll be just a layout and no controls. So instead of putting it in standard values, we're going to use, and this is a really old diagram, but it's come back to life with Headless SXA. And really what this is, we're going to use renderings, partial designs, and page designs. So this is an XXA concept. So if you use XXA, this is very familiar. It's not new with Headless. But you'll create partial designs, and those can contain one or more renderings, right? So just your components. And these partial designs, you can actually edit them just like any other page. So it's literally you open them in Experience Editor or Pages or whatever you prefer, and you can go ahead and build these partial designs and then roll them up to a page design. Okay, so now you can select multiple. The beauty here being, because this just seems like extra steps, is, well, in the future, this all lives within the content tree. This doesn't live on templates. So in the future, your authors can go ahead and create new partial designs, new page designs, and as long as the component is there, they don't need a developer, right? So this is another one of those low-hanging fruit that's easy to miss, because technically you can go to standard values and do that. And I actually did that for my first implementation. And then when I quickly realized that gap, I had to go back and fix it, right? So using this will give them that control. Now, it doesn't stop here, because right now we've only created the partials and the page design, but we actually haven't related it to a particular page. And that's where you can either do that through the Pages editor. If you go to the template view here, and again, excuse all the blurring. Again, this was a real client environment. But here on the left, we have our template names. And then I can assign, hey, based on that template, right? Again, we'll still have like a blog page template, a catalog page template, but now you can map what design gets assigned to that page here on the fly, right? So again, without a developer, we can create a new page design, map it to that, and we're good to go. And you can also do that here for the page designs in Content Editor. So I can go to that page designs item, go to content, and now I can map all of my templates to the different pages. Okay, so you can see it's a bit of a different mind shift if you haven't used XXA, but really the whole point is, again, to give that power to the authors. Here's one that's it's more technical, and it's more of a gotcha rather than a feature that came with it, though I guess it depends how you see it. But it's, hey, we serialized our items, we deployed, and we're not seeing the changes on XM Cloud. And the natural question comes like, wait, didn't we deploy? Didn't it succeed? All our checks are green. What happened? And the reason this happens, I mean, it can happen for a variety of reasons, but one that's easy to kind of be stumped on, and I know I was the first time I ran into it, is
database.
Yes, it is database. So on your local, it goes from Git to YAML to your CLI to your database, and then that shows up in Sitecore. And from there, you can make changes to your database and you can serialize them back into YAML files. But on XM Cloud, it's close, but it's a little different, and the devil's in the details. So during the deployment, we grab the same Git files, we grab the same YAML files, but in this point, we don't put them in the database. Instead, they get put in a resource file. And again, there's no connection to this database here. So, okay, is there no database in XM Cloud? No, there is a database there. So how are you going to get these two to kind of work together? Well, there's a process that merges these two. And what's crucial here is that the database always overrides the resource files. And once that merge happens, we finally put it in Sitecore. So where's the problem here? Well, what happens is perhaps we serialized an item. At one point, we deployed. There was nothing in the database. We'll say it has ID 123. And hey, it showed up in Sitecore fine. Our deployment was a success. Deployment number 2 comes around. We also serialized that item with ID 123. And we notice, man, we deployed, but we don't see the updates on that item in Sitecore. And it's because at some point between those two deployments, somebody touched that item directly on the XM Cloud environment and created essentially a record or a snapshot of that item in the database. And because the database always overrides what's on the resource file, you essentially get stuck with that snapshot. Now it's a pretty, if you see that, there's a few different mechanisms, right? But I would say, hey, should we be serializing that file, or do we need to have some additional processes in place? But nonetheless, it is something that happens relatively commonly. To fix it, all you have to do, by the way, is delete that item. You go to content editor, and if you know that that item is in the resource file, you can just delete it, and it'll fall back to the resource file. And
sorry, Kevin, can I
Yes.
suggest alternative options?
Yeah,
So
please.
everything you said is valid. However, there are new couple of ways to manage that provided by development team. So inspecting admin folder files in all these pages like show config and others. I noticed there is a new ASPX file under this folder, and that one is exactly for addressing this issue. So this file allows you to come back to the data to the item and resources values rather than those databases. And I don't remember that exactly, but from my, if my memory tells me right, there is exactly the same command works with CLI. So you can do that from CLI as well. And thanks to development team for giving us these tools.
That's awesome. This is the one thing I love about XM Cloud. And I should have put that disclaimer. Like, these are my learnings, but it really feels like every time I do a XM Cloud implementation, I learn something new, or like Martin just said, there's a brand new feature. So that's fantastic. I'll have to look into that. Right now, the way I've been doing it, which now after you've said that, looks like caveman method, is enabling the source property. So you just go to the content editor, enable the developer tag, you can see the item source, and now you can tell, if there's a particular item you expect it to change, you can at least now verify, hey, is there a snapshot in the database, or is it coming from my resource file? Right. So this is how I was doing it. So thank goodness, and thank the the product team and development team for adding that. Okay, and then the last thing I want to touch on are XM Cloud components. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this editor right here, but most likely if you're moving to XM Cloud, or you just move to XM Cloud, your marketing team is very excited about this particular feature. And there's just a few things you need to make sure you have set on your end to be able to support this. One is, again, make sure you're using an up-to-date template for your head solution. And if you're not, you're going to have to do that whole Delta dance where it's like, okay, what happened? Why am I missing this? And we had to do it before. But in this case, our template does include it. But if there is a new feature that's similar, again, you have to do that head upgrade dance to make sure you're compatible. Once you make sure you are compatible, you'll see your beautiful component. And one thing that again, the devil's in the details with these things. You have this beautiful component, you got it all working, but you run into the issue where not only do you have multiple environments inside of XM Cloud, but you also have multiple projects inside of XM Cloud. And I've seen people go manually create the same exact component on the next project, where if you just look a little bit, and I don't know when this was added, for all transparency, it could have been it wasn't there initially, but if you go to settings, you can actually enable sharing those components across your whole organization. Martin, you got a question?
And very little people know, in addition to that, you can actually serialize components and serialize them back. So it's not the serialization format you would get with the default Sitecore items. It's a little bit more clumsy, but I tested it out. It worked. So I managed to serialize that and get it back. And as my favorite saying, if you don't have it on a file system, you don't own that. If you have it on a file system, you will be able to reproduce that, shift it between the projects, and what is more important, source control.
I like that. Yet another tool on the tool belt. And the next natural question is, when should I use it? Because again, XM Cloud Components is just such a powerful feature that the marketing team just wants to just pounce. They're like, hey, can we build everything on this? And you can, but I think there are some places that it shines and some places that it's probably not the best fit. So for ideal, I think it's great for those situations where you need that quick turnaround, right? I have a campaign coming up, I probably don't need something to be pixel perfect, but I need it to be, on brand. It needs to look good. If you have a XM Cloud style, it's a great place to use those components. If you don't need state management, right? Because these components are kind of built in isolation between them. If you have any type of state management needs where, hey, if I do this on one component, this other thing happens on this completely unrelated component, this is probably not going to work. So it's ideal when you don't need that state management. And there is a minor performance hit with XM Cloud components. As long as it's acceptable, it's fine. It's depending on the size of your site, it might vary from 5% to 15% overhead. And really, it's not this black box as to why. It's mainly because it has to load the styles, right? It does get statically site generated on the back end. It does work. So the DOM does include your component already, but there is a style sheet that needs to come from Edge to actually style the component. And that's what can add that additional latency and additional performance penalty. So of course, when they're not ideal, it's essentially the inverse of that. In addition to if you have just complex UI with many variations, again, the whole, hey, on desktop is a grid, but on mobile it's a slider, and in between this, like a weird in between state, that now you're getting more into, again, you're better off with a front end, a normal front end component. And here's a bunch of resources that I used across. So basically what I did is if I struggled somewhere, if I got stuck somewhere, or I probably spent more than 2 or 3 hours on something, I was making note of it, doing my research. And these are all of the resources that I used. So if you want to dig into any more of these, I've added this here for you guys to get quick access. And that's it. Thank you guys. Any questions?
I have some comments about it. So let's start from the last one, components. Both components and forms, you fairly mentioned they operate in a kind of black box mode for me. And I once tried to understand how it all works under the hood. So first of all, I want to understand where these guys get published. So it's definitely something like Experience Edge, but it's not Experience Edge. So to address this, you will go and see how they apply to the page. So when you open up Experience Editor or Pages, obviously, but Experience Editor, you still see your components there, these composable components presented there, and you still see your forms there on a page. So that all works through these two, I would call them wrapper components. They're called FEAS, front end as a server, and yeah, that's the one. And the other is just a little above. It's BYOC, bring your own component wrapper. So these two are fundamentals to basically present forms and components. So I decided to go and play a trick. Okay, what if I can use a component builder, and with component builder, I can embed the forms in the same manner as you consume forms from the pages on your pages. And then nest it in that way that I basically put a form into component, then I put this composable component into a page. And I made it up with first components builder, added a form, it presented nicely. I mean, also composable form. Then I went to pages, added it to a page, it presented nicely. I open up Experience Editor. So again, that all worked through the this outer wrapper. I don't remember which one was that. I think it was FEAS because it was component. And believe me or not, it all worked nicely. I recorded this presentation and presented it for Sitecore. I will share it in a comments to this user group. But yes, it all shows an Experience Editor. It all published to Vercel. It worked nicely. So the form that is embedded in component, that is embedded in a page, it served perfectly well. And what is more important? Styles. Styles were passed through. There were some sort of distortions, but I don't know if these distortions are coming from my custom styles on my rendering host. But, oh man, it still worked. That's the magic, but it worked. So that was for components. You mentioned page templates and partial and page templates, which are game changer. I would say for my team, there was even bigger game changer page branches. So this is a very powerful technique. Again, it's something provided by Headless SXA. So you entirely construct a page with everything you want to be. And imagine a scenario like I had for the content migration from external sources, like pretty wild external sources. We pull the content using authoring management API. We wanted to kind of create a page, and well, page branches served us so well in this scenario. Like everything was predefined, pre-created, less effort for your editors. Of course, editors will be very thankful for you. It's always much easier to delete unwanted stuff rather than add stuff that is non-existent on a page, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you start getting into components that you have to really compose on top of each other, like we looked at the grid, right? Is great that it doesn't have to be a partial or page design that can be layered on top of your branch. And it'll then kind of compose those components within that branch. So yeah, absolutely. I didn't cover that, but I agree that that's a very powerful aspect to kind of the presentation detail layers.
And you mentioned the layout and structural components in the beginning of your presentation. I want to keep an intrigue again around this new feature coming from Sitecore, the new structural component that will be kind of all-in-one, something really powerful and good, which I believe will be supported entirely and ultimately. And yes, I know, like Experience Editor, we already don't have feature parity between Pages and Experience Editor. And Experience Editor should have gone at some stage. That was saying in Sitecore, at least from XM Cloud. For XP, it's essentially central point. Yes, I heard 2 days ago on our Los Angeles Sitecore user group, there was a presenter saying that Pages will eventually come to XP world, other way around, which is surprising because, and non-surprising at the same time, because Pages actually origin from XP environment. They were called Horizon these days, and now they're coming back. So from my point, it's basically a revolutionary step because currently I cannot extend Pages. So let's say if I want to plug an external DIM other than Content Hub, I cannot do that. At least on the Pages, I cannot extend it. I cannot modify it. And with that in mind, I'll be able to do that at least for XP. So this is something really exciting. But Experience Editor will go, and I think that is too good because let's think why we have the CM in first place. So CM is the only container that runs on .NET Framework. Everything else runs with .NET Core, and effectively it could be Linux based. Because of this CM image, we have to run Docker containers on Windows, which is a pain. Like it's a really big pain for all of us. Imagine if you get rid of this solo container, then everything else would be able to compile to Linux because .NET Core are cross-platform. You can compile them to Linux containers at a cheaper runtime, at a more faster runtime, and more reliable. That would be a different world of Sitecore. But because of Experience Editor, we still keep the CM, we still keep the lots of legacy stuff, and evolutionary, this should have gone at some stage, and it will. So by that time, we will lose the only legacy thing we have from the decade ago. We have with Sitecore, and entire Sitecore will be renovated, I would say. So this will came for better.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of little things like, and you can kind of see the writing on the wall because like I've been using Explore a lot, which is quite a drastic change, but you can just tell the snappiness, right? And it's essentially almost replacing CM as well, right? At least that interface. So I think there's a lot of exciting things coming down the line. We'll see when they happen.
I would agree with both you and Alex about the customization of the rendering app. So a little bit story behind the context. In my organization, I am the person who is responsible for maintaining our proprietary starter kit. So Sitecore has Foundation Hat, which is, in my opinion, decent. starter kit, but I see quite a lot of things that would have been built on top of that. And within our organization, mostly it was myself, but of course there were people supporting me and helping me, pull requesting. We built the starter kit, which we actually wanted to be, with lots of connectivities, with lots of features, with automatic deployments, like pretty every life cycle of the XM Cloud, which I identified, was implemented there. So far, so good, it works. The next thing is, okay, but original starter kit upgrades, they update it from time to time. So how do I deal with that? So for me, it's every time it happens is a challenge. And say in challenge, I mean, I can spend 2 to 8 hours updating this SDK. And the more we deviate from the original code base, the more time it takes for me. So the last version I upgraded was 22.0. And while upgrading, I missed just one single file. That brought me kind of challenges. And thanks for one of my followers who made a pull request to fix that. It's all fixed. But you see, the features and powers come at a cost.
Yes, they do.
We have Alex raising a hand.
Yes, I have great presentation, by the way, like lots of really important points. Like I hit all the same issues, I think, during my development challenges. I just wanted to add regarding upgrades and keeping the folder names the same. Yes, it helps a lot if you like maintain the same structure. What also I found useful, if you actually end up modifying some files from Sitecore out of the box files and add your changes, super important to add a note, and I will send an example to the chat, to add a note that this is a change that I made, like it's intentional, like add some comment, like this, like we do it in this way, we add demo team customization. So then when you compare in WinMerge and see like this is a change, you can see right away, is it a change between the versions of JSS or is it something custom? And like, if you don't see this comment, then you can safely like in the merge, like copy over the changes, and it saves a lot of time. And also, if you are the person who always does upgrades and you do it frequently, you probably remember all those places where you did customizations, right? But if it's someone else doing the upgrade, this comment is just invaluable and it will help them to not to overwrite your changes.
It's priceless, man. It's priceless because in my organization, it's only me who does this type of upgrades, and I intentionally want it to be a single person because other way around, there's so lots of things that might be missed and omitted from the context. So I actually take a slightly more advanced approach to upgrading these versions, and I send it to a chat. I actually wrote a blog post about what I'm doing and how I'm doing. So yes, your point was to keep the name of the GSS app the same. I don't want to do that. I have my own name. But what I do instead, actually, I am kind of, I don't know how to explain it. Briefly, you have to read my article. I am pulling into my private repo from the public repo, and I do two-way exchange because I can pull request back. So I keep a copy of SXA folder exactly as it comes from the original starter kit under the same name. And I pull the changes and I merge the changes from the original starter kit into that folder. But that folder is not used for anything meaningful other than basically keeping this relationship. My particular JSS app is called differently. And then when I have all the recent changes in my repository in SXA Starter, I then compare what I have in SXA Starter with my actual starter kit. And that allows me to see the difference. And I see the diff history for the starter kit. And maybe there are like 5 to 6 more additional benefits to it, which I leverage from. And again, I keep the relationship with the original code, and I can pull request to original code. Like it's like best of the both worlds, but it's a little bit complicated.
It's like a nested repository. And I think we've actually done that for one of our proprietary starter kits where it's very similar, where you have a default site and then you had multiple rendering hosts, which effectively mimics kind of that example that you had. And we actually created custom scripts to do just that. So instead of us going and copy pasting different ones, what we did is for each site where we customize, we had basically a git ignore for the script on each site. So we can tell the relative path of the files. So we can basically just say update all the sites, and it'll go through and ignore all the files that we explicitly ignored. Now, of course, you still have to cross-validate that, but the idea is that it does 90% of the work for you, and you can focus your time on the 10%. So yeah, you can get very fancy with how you handle your upgrades, but the closer you stay to that default, the easier your life will be. But of course, there's always exceptions, and I think some scripts and technologies and just processes we can use to overcome some of those.
So the last comment from my side would be about the scaffolding. So you showed some scaffolding techniques. For our internal starter kit, we ended up with much more advanced scaffolding technique. So in very brief words, what has been done, the internal scaffolding mechanism of XM Cloud and Headless saying Headless, I mean this original SDK, not the starter kit, but SDK. So we used the same approach and we extended it. If you know this DevX plugins and similar, so basically with this scaffolding, we can create the new sites, the new everything with all the serialization, with all the things we want, and we can adjust the references for like items, like projects, names, like everything. So let's say tomorrow I need to create a starter kit for a new client, right? And of course, the best thing to donor this from would be our starter kit, because it is full of features and it's rich of the features. So how do I do that? I would leverage this scaffolding technique. So it knows everything we have. It will readjust all the names, including serialization, including the namespace, including the project, C#, like everything. It also will run me through the prompt of questions, what I want to include. Maybe I want to do multi-site, maybe I want to do single site, what size they are, some settings for the cell as well, like a bunch of things. And that applies to be super powerful. I can create a source code for a new client like in under an hour and having all the features. So I only need to go and exclude features I don't need. Isn't it good?
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's what I love about this. Yeah, there's probably 100 ways to skin that cat, but yeah, that's a very good. I mean, it sounds very similar to like when you create a React app, right? It sends you through a prompt and it kind of builds that template. So it's a great approach.
Same mechanism, yes.
Yep.
Okay,
right.
Any more questions?
All right.
If there are no
Thank you.
questions, thank you, Kevin. Nice
I will hand it
presentation.
over to Chet. Thank you.
Last but not least, Chet Podwin. You've got lots of GraphQL insights to tell us.
Yeah, I'm the host now. Kevin, really cool presentation. You must have a background in education because you did a really good job of just kind of going through the basics. Like,
yes,
that video could be part of like Sitecore's training for XM Cloud. That was really good.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to take a bit of a departure from everybody else's topics. Hopefully you can see on the screen here the title of the presentation, which is True Composability, GraphQL Federation. So the idea behind this is really kind of taking a look at what not just Sitecore, but other headless CMSs and digital experience platforms are doing in the industry, and kind of see how we can adapt or fit that into the Sitecore ecosystem. All right, so who is this guy? My name is Chet Potvin. I'm a cloud solutions architect, two-time Sitecore MVP. I'm a Symposium and SUGCON North America Food Tour organizer. I am from Houston. I live in Chicago, married with 2 kids. So if you hear any screaming in the background, that is them. But hopefully they will be asleep soon. All right, so agenda is just trying to keep it simple. What's the problem? What's the problem that I see? How we could potentially solve it, some of the different options that are out there, and then some ideas around how this could be applied in industry. Okay, so Alex, I know you work for Sitecore. I don't think I'm going to be surprising anybody here, but Sitecore is a monolith. Even with XM Cloud, it is still, in a lot of cases, a monolith, which isn't always a bad thing. The reason why Sitecore, I think, got a lot of traction early on is that it allowed folks to kind of put everything into one system, right? So it was really straightforward. If you needed to get access to content, if you needed to present, web pages and components, you would just go to Sitecore. If you needed to do personalization, content search, host your media assets, all of these things could be handled within the Sitecore Experience platform. The problem there is that, because it did so many things, it didn't really do anything really, really well. Okay, so that's kind of how we started. And now composable, I think a lot of people have come up with different definitions for composable. I've had different definitions for composable over the years. It's still a relatively new term within the last probably 5 years or so. And in my opinion, it really started as marketing technology that essentially at its core represents a choice for customers. With a giant monolithic DXP, it's easy for the customers to say, I'll just buy that big thing and it's going to give me everything that I want. They may not use everything that's part of that solution, but they're still going to pay for it. So this allows customers to say, I'm going to buy just the basics for what I need based on my organization's marketing maturity level. And then as we grow, or as needs arise, we'll add on additional components. So I mentioned platform, right? So DXPs are no longer really a platform, but best of need products. You've probably heard the term best of breed. I stole this from, I think, somebody else in the Sitecore community, where it's best of need. And they're all supposed to work together. So from a technical standpoint, what that means is each product is essentially a set of APIs, which you could consider microservices. So they do one thing and they do one thing really well. Let me back up. If anybody has any questions or need clarification on anything, please raise your hand, stop, ask questions. I don't want this to just be me talking the whole time, but if that is how it goes, that's fine too. Okay, so we talked about what Sitecore used to be. We talked about composable. Now we can talk about the composable DXP, which is XM Cloud is one of those offerings that Sitecore provides. Again, still relatively new. There's a bunch of different products and microservices available that Sitecore has acquired over the last few years. And kind of integrated into their system. And the big challenge for Sitecore and for partners and for customers is, how the heck do we tie all of these things together, right? Sitecore has done a really good job with the cloud portal, kind of pulling stuff in, but it still is a little bit clunky, especially for customers that don't have a partner engaged, or they're not particularly technical. Getting all of those things kind of working is a challenge, right? So what my idea here is that there's a real need for a proven strategy that consolidates products into a single cohesive solution. I'm not going to provide a proven strategy here. I'm just gonna kind of drop some ideas out there, just to see if any of them stick. So what can we do? I don't know. There's Sitecore has provided one option with Sitecore Connect. It's a piece of tooling that you license through the vendor. But there's also some other things that that customers or partners can do as well. So the first solution, and we're kind of gonna talk about things in an evolutionary pattern here. So first option is an API gateway, and what that does is there's kind of two different variants here. Well, one of them I call deal with it, and that is, you know, you have several REST services that consume data from different places, right? It can be Sitecore, it can be a DAM, it can be you know, an internal API, an orders API, different things like that, right? And then you have a single API gateway that kind of sits on top of those APIs, so that in order to access that data, you only have to make a call to one spot or one endpoint. The reason why I call it deal with it is it doesn't really address you know, potential needs, specific needs of a potential consumer of that API. So a web application may have different needs than a mobile application or some other type of channel. And so you're kind of just stuck in that situation, taking the data that the REST API gives back to you. You don't really get the ability to kind of shape or adapt to that data based on your specific needs. So that's where the second variant comes in. And that's this is something that I have, a pattern that I have seen within the industry. Some Sitecore partners do this for their customers. It's called BFF, or backends for front ends. So you can see here, if I don't know if you can see my cursor, but these three boxes here kind of serve as that adapter layer that customize the API for the consumer of those services. And it is, you know, runs in the back end, but it kind of massages or converts that response or the request so that it kind of fits the contract that the client is expecting it in. So one really important thing to call out here is you see a lot of arrows here, and if you're an architect, for me at least in my job, I have to draw a lot of pictures, and if I draw pictures that have arrows crisscrossing like this, it's automatically going to like raise flags with people because it looks confusing, and it is, because what the heck is this, right? You've got all of these different things pointing at different places, and now instead of 3 separate applications that need to be maintained, you now have 6. So you kind of have a challenge here where, as you start to add services, things become even more complicated. If you need to add another channel, then you know it just becomes more complicated to the nth degree. All right, that was a big lead up. The solution, or the idea that that I'm kind of presenting to you all today, is called federated GraphQL. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is, you know, until I started working on headless implementations of Sitecore, I didn't know what GraphQL was. And so one of the things that I dove into when working in Headless is, hey, you know, what is GraphQL? How can I use it? You know, what does it do? It's a really cool process. There's a lot of nifty things that you can learn from GraphQL. I'm not going to get into those details now. That's probably a good topic for another talk. But ultimately, there are some pretty significant benefits to GraphQL because it, at the root level, it is self-documenting. There is what's called a schema that comes along with GraphQL. that allows a client to see exactly what they can query from the server. So you don't have to use open API specifications anymore. It has its own built-in specification that that gives you IntelliSense and other tools and benefits that are available in most editors out there. The second part is that the client or whoever is consuming that API get exactly what they're asking for. So if I am calling an API to get a list of products and all I need is the product ID, then that is all I will get. I don't have to call a list of products and get an entire blob of data that has the ID, the name, an image asset, you know, taxonomy, categories, you know, just a bunch of extraneous stuff that that bloats the pipe. So that's another big benefit of GraphQL is you don't have to deal with that backend for front end challenge because the client gets to ask for what they want. Another big thing is if you're using modern JavaScript technologies, GraphQL using libraries such as Apollo is like almost second nature. It's really easy to retrieve data and to post data to GraphQL endpoints. So this reduces that burden on those front end teams because if you don't have something like this in place, a lot of your integration ends up happening within your front end application. So, you know, could be with if you're lucky enough to be using Vercel, it could be in Next.js or it could be in Node as part of the middleware. If you don't have the option of using Vercel, then you have to do it some other way, and this is a potential solution there. One of the other benefits of this is that it can give you some consistency in delivery. So what that means is that you can create composable blueprints that are driven by these API layers, and you can essentially put together a DXP or a composable DXP that supports different composable tool sets, right? So if you are building a starter kit and you want to be able to support the 3 or 4 main search providers that are out there, you can create a contract for a search API, and then you can plug that in to whatever search provider the customer chooses to use, and you don't have to change your front end. I'll let that sink in for a second. The other thing here is that it's all GraphQL. So you've got what's called a super graph, which, if we go back one page, serves the same purpose as your API gateway. And then what's called a subgraph is those are your microservices. So those microservices can all be REST. They can be a direct database call. They can be, you know, another API call, whatever your heart desires, right? You can have a team that maintains those microservices, and then you just put a GraphQL proxy, if you will, on top of it, and you can write those GraphQL servers in plain old JavaScript, TypeScript, or C# even. But the router, the gateway, the router, whatever you want to call it, provides a unified schema that intelligently sends requests to those subgraphs based on the information that you're requesting. So even though you've got all of these APIs kind of hooked into one router, if you're only getting product information, it's only going to reach out to that product subgraph and grab the information that you need. If you need to get information from multiple subgraphs, it will go out and get both of them. And of course, same rule applies. The information that you need the information you ask for is exactly what you'll get back. The other big benefit here, just like with an API gateway, is that your router handles cross-cutting concerns. So things like availability, reliability, observability, logging, things like that, and security are all handled at that router level so that your backend API teams don't have to worry about that. It's just built into the product. Okay. So you're probably asking, all right, that's an interesting concept. So like, who's doing this? What, I don't want to build this myself. So what kind of tools are there that I can use? So I've gone through and taken a look at some of the top vendors that are out there. I guess you could call them top. I found 5 vendors that do something similar to this. Azure has what's called API management. If you're familiar with Azure as a cloud provider, you've probably heard of it or use it today. AWS also has another tool called AppSync, which is similar to API management or API gateway, except it is GraphQL focused as opposed to API management, which is mostly REST API focused, but it also has GraphQL as well. There's MuleSoft Anypoint, which is a big integration solution that's out there in the industry. Cloudflare API Gateway, and then Apollo Graph OS. So what I did is try to come up with some requirements around, what this solution might need, right? So the big one is I work at a Sitecore partner. We do technological implementations for our customers. We don't always know what their technical requirements are going to be. So ideally, we would like to have a solution that is cloud portable, which means we can move it from Azure to Google Cloud to AWS to whatever. So that's a big one for us. And the only 2 options that really satisfy that requirement are MuleSoft and Apollo Graph OS. Microservice-based is obviously another piece that's important here because we want to be able to give teams the autonomy to be able to build APIs without impacting others. So we don't want to have any blocking or any impacts between those groups. GraphQL Federation, the topic of this discussion, is critical here. Azure API Management says that they do it, but not really. Really, the two biggest players from a GraphQL Federation standpoint are AWS AppSync and Apollo Graph OS. Availability, resilience, observability, and security. A lot of this has to do with how the application or how the solution is hosted. And so that's why you'll see a lot of question marks in here because there's nothing published, or at least I wasn't able to find anything that's published around this. But most of these things have some sort of logging built in. There's security built in that can tie into different identity providers and authorization providers. Another big one that comes with Apollo Graph OS and MuleSoft is automated testing. So what that means is if you make a change to your schema, to your GraphQL schema, the platform will automatically test it to make sure that it works before it's published to the router. So that's kind of a nice feature because if somebody accidentally changes something and introduces a problem, it's not going to take down your whole system. If your schema is valid and things are working correctly, then it'll get published to your router and it'll be made available to your end users. Some other information in here, I can share all of these links in the, or I will share all of these links in the presentation, but there's plenty of good documentation out there. And then I kind of put a number in here around training and estimated cost. I'm not going to really tell you which one is best, because I think that if this is something that your organization is looking into, it's important to kind of do your own homework and see what makes the most sense for your group. Okay. I'll stop there. Any questions?
I just want to thank you for this vendors summarization table. It's really, really important. And everything is at the same place. I love it.
Yeah, this is really good. Chet, I did want to ask, I mean, with the Apollo, I mean, are we able to tie into the XM Cloud Edge API? I mean, are we able to federate that?
That is a fantastic question. Yes, but not easily.
Okay.
I don't know how much you've looked into Federation, and this is probably one of my big gripes around Apollo's Federation attributes, is that in order to be able to federate a subgraph, that schema has to include like 2 lines of code in it that basically says that we subscribe to Apollo Federation. That's not available today as part of Sitecore's schema if you're using the GraphQL API. If you wanted to, there is still a REST API, and you could consume the layout service as a REST API and create your own schema that way. I wouldn't recommend it because that schema is almost immediately stale as soon as you make any changes within Sitecore. If you change a template, if you change fields, any of that stuff. So this is something that I want to look into more because ultimately I do think that Sitecore in this world could be a really powerful subgraph. But there's some things that need to happen in order for that to work.
Okay, thanks.
Great question. You really got to the heart of it. Anything else?
Not for me. Thanks. This is great.
Okay. So, we talked about a real world example, right? So if you've got a standard website that doesn't have a whole lot of integration alongside it, this is probably over the top for you. If you can source all of your content, all of your assets from XM Cloud, or another CMS or something else, you probably don't need to look at this. But if you've got a customer or a project or whatever that does require some level of integration, consider this as a potential option. I put a blueprint out here that is for a customer portal. So at my company, we do a lot of customer portal work, like customer self-service, that kind of stuff. So there's a login included. There's some sort of like product catalog, things like that. And it's all, it's all secured behind, a login. So there's a lot of fairly heavy integration work that goes alongside this. And sometimes it makes sense for that to be within Sitecore. Sometimes it doesn't, right? In this case, I've got Sitecore as a content subgraph here. So we can consume content for pages, or we can consume content that is just available within Sitecore if we aren't necessarily concerned with the presentation. So that's the difference between a decoupled CMS and a headless CMS. I won't get into that, but if we just needed to get a list of items or something like that, we could get that information from Sitecore very easily. So in this example, we just have one web channel. We've got a GraphQL router. We've got a user subgraph that takes care of authentication through Okta and authorization through Salesforce. We've got a subgraph that we can use to schedule and to list webinars that the customer may be presenting for their customers. And then that consumes an API provided by WebEx. There's a reporting subgraph that grabs stuff from blob storage for PDFs and other things that get generated on a schedule. There's a product subgraph that grabs information directly from a database. A service subgraph that allows customers to submit service requests. And then, of course, our content subgraph that consumes information from the Sitecore API. All of this stuff kind of lives underneath one umbrella, if you will, and none of it touches each other. So you can introduce changes to each one of these pieces without impacting the overall solution.
This is powerful, man. Yeah.
Right. So like I said, this is just an idea. There is some it's a relatively new concept within the last year or two. This is something that I have found just in searching and getting to understand GraphQL a little bit more, because it is a very powerful set of tools that we can use. And we'll see if this kind of takes off. But just a quick summary, right? So I've had to adjust my mindset a little bit to be more composable, right? So I've been working with Sitecore for the last 7 or 8 years, and the simplicity of the monolith is really ingrained in my brain, and the idea of pulling everything into Sitecore and accessing it there is really something that I've had to kind of break away from, because it's not necessarily the best way to do things, in my opinion, especially if you're truly going to be composable. The other thing is just be wary, if you're looking at vendors for integration, just be wary of plug and play connectors. For a lot of businesses, integration with those backend systems is core to their business. And so being handcuffed to, a product that requires different integration tool sets, that can be challenging to sell to a customer. Autonomy is another big thing, right? So when you use a vendor provided solution, that kind of creates a bottleneck there. So being able to give your backend teams the autonomy to build services that just kind of publish in underneath that umbrella is huge. It gives those groups, whether it's your own development team, your customer's development team, or some other external team, everybody kind of playing in that same sandbox is really powerful. Another big one that a lot of people forget about is just being mindful of the folks who are consuming your APIs. Those, to me, those are my customers, right? So the better that I can make their experience, the more successful we will be as a project team or as an organization. Then, of course, do your homework, right? Evaluate API gateway solutions that fit your organization's needs. This is kind of a complicated solution. Don't go out and just say, oh, hey, Chet said this, let's do it, right? I'm not saying I have good ideas. This is just an idea. And again, this is not a pitch or recommendation. It's just a thought starter. And really, it's just another way of thinking about addressing the complexities around composability. There's some additional resources here. GraphQL.org has some good learning tools just to understand the different terms. There's just a glossary of terms that are used in GraphQL. Contentful has some stuff around federated GraphQL. There's some good documentation from Apollo on their Federation products. AWS AppSync has some stuff. But really the cool one, and the reason why I have it bolded here, is Apollo GraphQL has several tutorials that you can get certified on, and it's free. So if you're new to GraphQL and you want to just learn the basics, you can go out and you can get a badge just for learning GraphQL. And then if you really want to get into some of the federation topics, they have a professional developer certificate that you can check out as well. So if nothing else, check that out. But if you have questions or if I've piqued your interest in any way, I'm on Sitecore Slack. I am on X and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for your time. We are over slightly. Are there any questions?
If I have any questions, I need to absorb this information first of all. So as you know, everything is recorded here, and while I will be prepping the recording for publication, I want to get it through again from A to Z, and to fill the gaps in my understanding, because I have few. But that looks pretty fundamental to me. It's definitely an architectural pattern I should be considering in my further development. Any questions from the audience?
I do have one more.
Yes.
And, you know, with GraphQL, we ultimately aren't dealing with as secure of an API, you know, because all of the data on the graph is you know, public essentially, as long as you have that bearer token. Now, would you get the same you know, limitation with GraphQL Federation? I know with the you know, the API gateway, you get authentication, you get all the same things, and you might. Is it as granular with your experience?
So you have the bearer token, you have access to things, but the cool thing about Federation is that you can pass that token down to the subgraphs as well. And so those subgraphs can authorize you and only return the content that you are authorized to see.
I see. Okay.
So that's a benefit,
Yeah.
because again, you're not just like returning the world to your to the person who's calling the API. You're just giving them what they are authorized to see.
Okay. Cool. I was hoping that was the case. Thanks. That's it.
Cool questions. Love it.
Any more?
Nothing from Alex. He's like, I'm not going to say anything.
Oh, that's quite complicated. Like, I bet the guys on the product side, like the guys who actually built XM Cloud and like the core product, I'm not sure if they use API gateways, but they might use something like this, and they would be like, yeah, they would have more like questions or follow-ups on this topic. But I personally haven't used this, and it's new to me. It's quite interesting. Like, it's probably more applicable to like larger organization, like larger projects, I guess, right? Like really big implementations.
Yeah, because there's overhead with it, right? So like, do I need to go out and like provision all these subgraphs plus a router and all this stuff if I'm just consuming content from Sitecore?
Yeah.
Probably not. It's when you start to go and you are getting information from lots of different sources. Instead of trying to pull all that into Sitecore using Sitecore Connect or some other integration technology, you're kind of approaching it from a different.
And I guess it helps with use cases when you have limited, like when you have API request limits on some APIs. I guess this could serve as a caching proxy as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You could kind of roll your own experience edge.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah.
But keep in mind, at the end of the day, this is just an additional architectural part, and of create an additional layer in front of you. It's like a front man and a man, or man in the middle, in terms of on the road of your traffic coming from external sources into your system.
Yeah.
And that power and that feature set comes at some cost of, and like usually when you get features, there are trade-offs and cost of maintenance. So
Yes.
this is something you need to keep in mind. Basically, with all this additional layer, you have someone to maintain that. Saying maintain, I mean, there should be proper API testing tools, ideally provided by this framework. So if you integrate different sources of data, they must notify you if one or multiple sources of data fall out of the availability, so that you can take action. But like similar things, you all have to maintain.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
have
and
a
I think-
question. Oh,
I think
sorry,
what-
go ahead.
I think what you were getting at is that there is a performance hit that you take. Instead of going to these APIs directly, you're going to get some latency because you have to hit a router, whether it's GraphQL or an API gateway. You still have to hit that.
Or other way around,
Plain
if cache is
first.
implied, because you get things faster, as Alex said.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. There are always trade-offs.
So this super graph, right? I think it's very interesting because once I fully got my head wrapped around GraphQL, it's almost impossible going back. Is it a all or nothing? Like let's say, you know, your proposed customer portal, right? Let's say only 3 of my microservices are GraphQL, but the other 2 are just REST APIs, right? Those haven't been ported. Can I still use the super graph in front of all of them? Or is it no, super graph only works on top of microservices that are also on GraphQL?
The super graph, the reason why it's a super graph is because it takes the schemas from each subgraph and it stitches them together into one giant freaking schema.
Gotcha. Got it.
So if you needed to have like a mixed mode environment, then you could use API Manager or some other API gateway solution where you could have GraphQL as well as your REST APIs until
In
you
front
get
of
those.
that.
Yes.
Got it.
Until
Got it.
if your organization decides, all right, we're all in on GraphQL, right? We're going to be just like Netflix, then you can fairly easily convert your REST APIs to GraphQL. The training, I did it in a couple hours. And then you can start to leverage that super graph. But that's
Yeah,
really
no, yeah, no, that helps, right? Because I think, right, we're working for a partner as well, right? When we get to clients, a lot of times your microservices are not owned by one resource, right? They're different teams with different priorities, different timelines. So knowing what capabilities there is to roll this out, like if it's a, hey, let's try it with this API or this 2 microservices because they're GraphQL, but also it needs to work with the greater ecosystem. It's good to know that there are options to kind of even have a mixed mode, even though a little bit more complexity, but it gives you that flexibility. So thank you.
There's also a really good example of you can use this pattern for breaking down a monolith. So what that means is you put the super graph in front of the monolith and it just has, you know, potentially one big GraphQL API or GraphQL server underneath it. But then as you start to break that monolith down into microservices, you kind of keep that consolidated schema in place, but now they're hosted in different places. They're managed by different teams. So it's a way to kind of like scale the organization or make things more maintainable. We're going to be using this in a situation where we've got a monolithic API that's built in .NET Core. And so we're going to put this over the top of that. And we're going to start to break it up into pieces so that it's more manageable and easier to maintain.
That sounds awesome.
I think it's called Strangler Fig.
Equally awesome name.
Right. If there are no more questions, I want to thank you, Chad, very much. That was a very helpful presentation. At least I learned something. Definitely. As I said, some going back and a refresher for me to when I will be mastering this session. Last but not least, I want to say thank you to all the participants these type of events would not have been possible without the support of Sitecore community. And this is something that makes our platform so strong. And recently I was applying for immigration based on the exceptional ability criteria. So I'll tell you my story of anecdote. Now, to prove the weight of the platform, I compared Sitecore to Adobe. And believe me or not, like the budgets are more than hundreds times in favor of Adobe, but Sitecore managed to overtake them just because of the community. Nothing on the whole market has this community as we have in Sitecore. And thank you all of us who are contributing, who are doing these presentations, who are organizers. We have a wonderful event happening every Friday morning. It's called Sitecore Lunch. Morning for me, but it's like lunch for the East times. Chet, you are always there. I know I try to get there as often as possible. Look at the socials, there are advertisements. If you are a more shy person, don't like to speak or present, or just want to read, you can go to Sitecore Telegram. There are lots of channels about all the products. Of course, we have Sitecore Slack. You can ask any technical questions, and you, believe me, you will be supported by all the best minds in the industry. So I want to thank all these people. With that in mind, we end up our meeting for today. I'll call it a day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Good night,
Thanks, bye.
y'all.